As part of the Missouri Compromise, or Compromise of 1820, Missouri entered the United States as a slave state, and Maine entered as a free state. The Compromise also stated that slavery could not extend into the territories above the 36-degree, 30-minute line or the southern state line of Missouri. Also, if you'll notice, the present-day northwest corner of Missouri is not there. It was known as the Platte Territory or Indian Territory. Prior to the Missouri Compromise, this land was claimed by the Iowa Nation. In 1824, the Iowa signed the first of what would be many land cession treaties. In this treaty, the Iowa ceded all of the northern half of the state except the Platte Territory, and the Iowa had until 1826 to completely move out of the state. In 1830, a second Prairie du Chien Treaty was signed, and the Iowa again ceded lands in western Missouri and Iowa, although settlement was not allowed in those lands at that time. However, the Iowa were not provided an interpreter and were unaware that they had signed those lands over to the United States government. At approximately the same time as the Iowa were being forcibly removed into the Platte Territory, Joseph Robidoux established his trading post at the mouth of Roy's Branch, just south. That creek that runs on the south side of this building is Roy's Branch. About a year later, he moved it a mile south to the mouth of Black Snake Creek on the Missouri River. He and his men were the only white men legally allowed to be in the area. Native American and European fur trappers would bring furs to the post and trade them for firearms, ammunition, beads, knives, and other trade goods. Robidoux then shipped the furs downriver to St. Louis. In return, more trade goods would make their way upriver to St. Joseph or to Black Snake Hills. Robidoux also built a ferry to cross the Missouri River, expanding his trade network to the west. In 1836, as the frontier was pushed farther and farther west and more Americans were demanding land, the Platte Purchase Treaty was signed. Under pressure due to illegal settlement on their lands, the Iowa and the Sac and Fox of Missouri agreed to sign over their land and move across the river onto a reservation in what would become the state of Kansas. Legend has it that Mahushka the Younger wasn't sure whether he should sign the treaty, so he went to what was then known as King's Hill, King apostrophe S, now just King Hill, in what is now South St. Joseph. And he was there to ask the spirits for guidance. While he was there, he noticed a plant growing on the side of the hill. This plant was not native to the area and was called plantain, but it was known to the indigenous peoples in the area as white man's foot, since it was said to grow where only the white man had been or soon would be. Mahushka took this as a sign that he and the leaders should agree to the treaty, and this treaty was ratified in 1837. The territory is now known as Northwest Missouri and is made up of the counties of Andrew, Atchison, Buchanan, Holt, Nottoway, and Platte counties. So now we have Northwest Missouri, and now we have Black Snake Hills becoming St. Joseph. So Buchanan County was established in 1838, and the city of St. Joseph was founded in 1843. Joseph Robidoux claimed a quarter section, or 160 acres, and commissioned 2 plats for a new city. One was done by Simeon Kemper. His layout had wide streets with smaller lots and was called Robidoux. The second design was by Frederick W. Smith, and his plat had narrow streets with larger lots and was named St. Joseph after Joseph Robidoux's patron saint. In case anybody was wondering whether Joseph Robidoux was actually a saint, he was not. All right, so here is what supposedly Joseph Robidoux said when he selected Frederick Smith's design or layout. He said, "I want to sell my land in lots, not give it away in streets." And he had a very good reason for this. On July 25th, 1843, the first lots were conveyed to the Choteau family in a deed of trust to secure the payment of a loan in the amount of $6,372.27, with 10% interest per annum. As the lots were sold, the money was used to pay back that loan. The interior lots were sold for $100, the corner lots were sold for $150. This is the original plat. It is a copy of that original plat. It was bounded by Missouri River on the west, Rubidoux Street on the north, 6th Street on the east, and Masseny Street on the south. This is an original copy of that plat that was submitted to the Court of Common Pleas in St. Louis on July 26, 1843. It was restored by the Missouri State Archives, repaired and restored, and is on display, I believe, in the county clerk's office at the Buchanan County Courthouse. A framed copy of this before restoration is actually at the St. Joseph Convention and Visitors Bureau and at the St. Joseph Museums. All of the streets in original town that run from east to west were named for Joseph Rubidoux's family, starting from north to south. The family name, Rubidoux, Farron, Jules, Francis, Felix, Edmund, Charles, and Sylvanie, all children with Rubidoux's second wife, Angelique, which is the next named street, and Masseny, Jules's twin sister who died in infancy. Now, there are some sources that indicate that Masseny was the twin sister to Eugene Joseph or Joseph Eugene Rubidoux, who was Joseph Rubidoux, our Joseph Rubidoux's eldest son from his first wife. But most of the sources do indicate that Masseny was Jules's twin sister. By December 1843, the population of St. Joseph had reached about 500. By 1846, the population had doubled to almost 1,000. And by 1850, the population was at about 1,900. In 1851, the city was incorporated, and the citizens elected their first mayor, Thomas Mills. Prior to that, a town council had governed the city. 1843 has been designated by the National Park Service as the official start of the Oregon Trail beginning in Independence. Now, while pioneers had been heading west for several years, this was the first major wagon train consisting of almost 1,000 people to jump off from the Missouri River. In 1844, a wagon train jumped off for the first time from the St. Joseph area, led by Cornelius Gilliam, leaving from Capel's Landing near present-day Amazonia. They would travel the St. Joe Road that would join with the Independence Road in the area of what would become the Kansas-Nebraska state line. Now, the primary advantage that St. Joseph had over Independence was that St. Joe was about 1 day's travel further west, and the town quickly became a jumping off point for immigrants to the fertile lands in Oregon. The St. Joe to California Road, identified by an 1854 survey, was the route most of the immigrants used during the gold rush years. Immigrants would line the riverfront and be backed up on Francis and Jules Streets, waiting their turn to cross the Missouri River, with Lodisa Frizzell commenting this on April 29, 1852. "We proceeded to the ferry, but could not cross for 2 hours, for the crowd of teams which were in before us. While waiting there, some 200 Indians of the Potawatomi and Winnebago came down the street." The April 28, 1852 St. Joseph Gazette reported, "Hundreds of California and Oregon immigrants arrive in our city daily. From present appearances, the immigration will be larger than it was in 1849 or 1850. As a result of the immigrants arriving in the newly formed town, Joseph Rubidoux built what has come to be known as, quote, the first motel in St. Joseph. Originally, the apartments were built to house families who were of, again, quote, the right quality, and Joseph Rubidoux decided what was the right quality. Also, to live in that particular building, they had to have purchased lots from Joseph. He would let the family stay at the row, rent-free, while their houses were being built near the downtown area. Later, people who were traveling west often stayed there at what is now known as the Rubidoux Row Museum, while they waited for their wagons to be ferried across the river, or if they arrived when it was too soon to cross the river, they could wait out the long, hard winters. Rubidoux Row is now a museum that tells the story of the fur trade, Joseph Rubidoux, and the building itself. Then, in 1845, a man by the name of James Marshall left St. Joseph, headed for California, settling in present-day Sacramento. In 1848, he saw a shiny piece of metal glittering in the water of the American River. Within a matter of weeks, the word was out and the gold rush was on. These years of 1849 to 1851 were the peak immigration years for the city, with more people leaving from St. Joseph than any other jumping off point on the Missouri River. Thousands of immigrants left what was considered to be civilization at the time when they left St. Joseph, heading towards what they called the unknown. St. Joseph continued to grow and prosper throughout the 1850s, with many of the residents in St. Joseph making their fortunes from outfitting wagon trains and supplying prospectors. But in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed, and trouble erupted on the Missouri-Kansas border that would eventually plunge the nation into civil war. This act, of course, allowed for the creation of the territory of Kansas out of the huge Nebraska territory. And it also repealed a section of the Missouri Compromise that kept slavery from expanding north of the 36-degree, 30-minute line. Now the question of slavery would be decided by popular sovereignty. Immediately, abolitionists began arriving in droves. Missouri border ruffians began crossing the border into Kansas territory to vote in elections to ensure that Kansas would become a slave state. History has called this period Bloody Kansas, Bleeding Kansas, or the Border Wars. The involvement of St. Joseph and Buchanan County in the border wars was not great. Tensions did run high in St. Joseph, however, although the city was protected to a certain extent by the Missouri River. But there was a major event in St. Joseph during the border war, and that was the trial of Dr. John Doy. In 1859, Dr. Doy, his son Charles, and a group of escaping slaves and freedmen from Lawrence were arrested in Kansas territory. Doy and his son were charged with slave stealing, with the charges originating in Platte County. During a change of venue trial in St. Joseph, Dr. Doy was convicted of the charge at his second trial. The first trial ended in a hung jury. On July 23, 1859, while awaiting the result of an appeal of the second verdict, Dr. Doy was broken out of the Buchanan County Jail by friends and supporters in the middle of the night and during a thunderstorm. So it was the proverbial dark and stormy night. Doy and the rescue party made their way during the storm to the riverbank, but they couldn't find where the boats were hidden. So as they're not sure where to look for them, and as they're discussing the situation, their voices were heard by two policemen who were investigating. The policemen had lanterns that they held high to light their way, and those lanterns inadvertently helped the rescue party locate their boats. Unfortunately, the boats were partly full of water and had to be bailed out using some of the men's hats while the others rowed across the Missouri River. Once they reached the opposite bank, they gathered their horses and headed towards Lawrence. The sheriff and his men pursued them for about a day, but decided it was useless to continue and turned back. That rescue party has come to be known as the Immortal 10, and Dr. Doy is the gentleman seated in front. In 1859, the first railroad to cross the state of Missouri, the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad, was completed between, oddly enough, Hannibal and St. Joseph. Construction began in 1857 from both east and west, joining in mid-February of 1859 somewhere in the Chillicothe area. Steamboats, of course, were still used to take people and goods to the north and west, but were used less and less coming from the east, especially after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. And that Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad is essentially the route of Highway 36. When California became a state in 1850, the citizens almost immediately began clamoring for faster mail service. The three most common routes were the Southern or Oxbow route, which could take as long as 3 to 4 weeks, through the Caribbean, across Panama, then up the Pacific Ocean. That would, another route would take 3 to 4 weeks across the Isthmus of Panama, provided the ships made it, or didn't sink or blew up. Or the mail could be carried by ship all the way around the tip of South America, which could take 3 to 5 months, again, if the ship actually made it to California. So at the urging of Senator William Gwynn of California, William Russell convinced his partners Alexander Majors and William Waddell of the freighting firm Russell, Majors, and Waddell to organize the Central Overland California and Pikes Peak Express Company that would operate a horse relay message service between St. Joseph and Sacramento. Russell's goal was to deliver the mail in 10 days in all types of conditions and prove that the central route could be used year-round. The company might then win the $1 million government mail contract. Beginning in January of 1860, the firm built about 90 stations, hired 80 to 100 men, and purchased 400 horses. By April 3rd, 3 months after starting construction, the enterprise was ready to begin. On April 3rd, 1860, Johnny Fry left St. Joseph, crossed the Missouri River by ferry boat, and headed west. At 2 a.m. on April 4th, another rider would start east from Sacramento. 10 days later, the westbound mail reached California and the eastbound mail reached St. Joseph. The great experiment was complete, and they had done it, and it was a success. But it cost approximately $5 per half ounce to mail a letter. So most of the mail was business or government related. Russell, Majors, and Waddell were losing money fast. And at the same time, the transcontinental telegraph was being built. And on October 24th, 1861, just 18 months after the first rider left St. Joseph on the Pony Express, the transcontinental telegraph was completed, making the Pony Express obsolete. Now, even while the Pony Express and the telegraph were joining the east and west coasts, north and south were becoming more divided, and St. Joseph was just as divided as the state and country. Many of the prominent citizens in town were Southerners, and their sympathies were with the Confederacy, but there were just as many people with Northern sympathies in town. St. Joseph was also of vital strategic importance. At a population of about 9,000, it was the second largest city in the state and was a major communication, economic, and transportation center. In May 1861, St. Joseph would become known as the town that tore down the United States flag. John L. Bittinger was a Republican supporter and had been appointed postmaster of St. Joseph. He felt that the Unionists in town were not getting the support they deserved from the federal government. So he decided to fly the Stars and Stripes from the roof of the post office on 2nd Street. M. Jeff Thompson was a businessman and former mayor of St. Joseph. He was also a staunch Southerner. At first, when Thompson was told of Bittinger's plan, he supposedly said, "Oh, that's okay. He's postmaster. He can fly whatever flag he wants to. It's fine." But when he actually saw the flag, something in him snapped, due in no small part to the fact that he was somewhat inebriated at the time. Now, in his memoirs, he does admit to being drunk, but he claims his enemies kept him in the saloon when plying him with alcohol to keep him away. So his enemies made him that way. Thompson, when he saw the flag, now the post office was actually across the street from Thompson's real estate office. So when he saw the flag, he went downstairs, outside, climbed a ladder on the outside of the post office, went up to the roof, cut the flag down, kind of slapped it against the roof line, and then let it fall to the crowd below, where it was promptly torn into pieces. Hearing about what was happening, Thompson's supporters came to his aid, and the flagpole was torn from its base, then thrown into the Missouri River. The men then turned their sights on other United States flags in town. Their next stop was Turner Hall, or the home of the Turnverein Society. This was a meeting place for the German citizens in town. A blacksmith and union man named Robert Bradshaw got there first. He locked the doors, and then he and others positioned themselves in front of them. Thompson stopped the men before they got to the building, and Alonzo Slayback, a local attorney, approached Bradshaw. Slayback asked Bradshaw if he would lower the flag in the interest of keeping the peace. Bradshaw eventually agreed, but stated he would fire a salute to the flag before he lowered it. As he appeared on the roof, the crowd threatened to shoot him. Slayback pulled his own gun and threatened to kill the first man that shot at Bradshaw. Bradshaw cheered the flag, fired 6 shots in salute, and safely lowered it. The flag would remain hidden until the end of the war. As a result, the St. Joseph City Council passed an ordinance declaring that no flags of any kind, federal or Confederate, could be flown within the city limits. However, that ordinance was very quickly repealed in June of 1861 when the first Union troops arrived in town. Within weeks of this and other incidents, St. Joseph would be under martial law. By mid-September, men of the 16th Illinois under the command of Colonel Robert Smith had arrived in St. Joseph. They were soon joined by other regiments and began setting up camp on Prospect Hill, a hill north of the business district. The soldiers built an oblong series of earthworks and named it Fort Smith after their commander. This fort, while not located on the highest bluff, had the advantage of overlooking both up and downriver, as well as the city itself. In the 1881 county history, the author tells the following story. One bright December morning in 1861, the people on 3rd Street heard a loud whizzing noise overhead. A few minutes later, there was another whizzing noise and a crash. They soon discovered it to be projectiles being fired from the cannon on Prospect Hill towards a target on the side of France Hill, 2 miles away in a direct line over the city. The first cannonball went slightly more than halfway to the target before burying itself under the platform of the Hannibal and St. Joseph Railroad passenger depot. The second shot again went halfway to the target, tore through the cupola of a livery stable on 4th Street, crashed through a bowling alley, hit the street outside, bounced 100 feet, and hit a fence post before burying itself under an outhouse. The county history doesn't indicate if the outhouse was occupied at the time. After this occurrence, a signed petition was presented to Colonel Smith asking that he please notify civil authorities before opening fire on the city again so that women and children could be evacuated. Today, the remaining land of Fort Smith is currently owned by the city under the auspices of the St. Joseph Parks and Recreation Department, and a portion of the earthworks have been restored and non-firing cannon, reproduction cannon, have been placed on top. Although no battles were fought in St. Joseph, for most of the war, the city was the headquarters of the Union Army in this district and remained of strategic importance. One part of St. Joseph's Civil War history that has been overlooked in the past is now being researched in depth. According to the 1860 census, there were 2,011 enslaved persons in Buchanan County. While there is no evidence as yet of there being stations on the Underground Railroad in St. Joseph, many freedom seekers took advantage of the frozen Missouri River to cross into Kansas and head north to freedom. The greatest number of enslaved people crossed the river, and we're expecting, the numbers are about 75 to 150, crossed the river in the winter of 1862-1863, just north of Fort Smith. Many of the businessmen who made their fortunes during the height of the Overland Trail period lost them during the war. At the end of the war, the city was described by one out-of-town reporter as a ghost town. It certainly wasn't the bustling metropolis that it had been, but it didn't take long for the city to become prosperous again. Those businesses that survived the war, as well as those that started over, turned to the wholesale trade. Companies included Britton Richardson Dry Goods, Wyeth Hardware, Englehart Davison Millinery, and the Summer Richardson Confectionery Company. Summer Richardson was also a bakery and developed a soda cracker with salt that won the premium prize at the Buchanan County Fair in the 1870s. The cracker, under that name of premium, is still sold today by Nabisco. This block in this picture is known as Wholesale Row and is one of the few remaining blocks of this era in the state. Prosperity had returned to St. Joseph, so much so that by the late 1800s, St. Joseph had more millionaires per capita than any other city of its size. The remnants of that prosperity can still be seen in houses like the Wyeth Tootle Mansion and the mansions on Hall Street, as well as in other neighborhoods such as Harris Kemper. These houses were built during the 1870s and 1880s, the beginning of the era known in St. Joseph as the Golden Age. Also, meat packing was very dominant in St. Joseph for many years. It actually began as early as the 1850s with John Corby being among the first in the industry here. However, it wasn't until the 1880s that the meat packers in St. Joseph organized and formed the stockyards, building the Livestock Exchange Building in 1887. By the 1920s, the stockyards were among the largest in the country, at its peak, handling 77,000 head of cattle per day. The stockyards also handled pigs, sheep, and goats. Many of the employees for the stockyards were immigrants from Eastern Europe. As refrigeration for trucks and rail cars became more advanced, the necessity for bringing livestock to a big stockyards dwindled. As a result, the packers and processors closed, and by the 1990s, there was little industry in the area, although the stockyards themselves did remain in business on a smaller scale. Some St. Joseph fun facts. I think they're fun, so therefore you're going to think they're fun. So, all right. In November 1881, a young man named Thomas Howard moved to St. Joseph with his family, and they rented this house at 20th and Lafayette. On Christmas Eve, the family moved to this house at 1318 Lafayette. On April 3rd, 1882, Mr. Howard was visited by two friends. As Mr. Howard stood to straighten a picture or a sampler, a shot rang out, and he fell to the floor. Within a matter of minutes, the word was out that the man who most people in town knew as Thomas Howard was in reality Jesse James, and he had been shot and killed by Robert Ford. During the 1880s and 1890s, more manufacturing firms began to grow and several products were invented in St. Joseph. In 1888, Chris Rutt, an employee of the St. Joseph Gazette, and Charles Underwood, a miller, bought the Pearl Milling Company. They began development of a ready-mixed, self-rising pancake flour. Over the next year, they experimented with various ingredients until finally finding a formula that worked. All the cook needed to do was add milk to the mixture. In 1889, Rutt and Underwood began marketing their invention as self-rising pancake flour. The name was changed that same year when Chris Rutt attended a minstrel show and heard the song Aunt Jemima. However, Rutt and Underwood were unable to raise the amount of capital necessary to market their product, so after registering the trademark, they sold the business and formula to R.T. Davis Mill and Manufacturing of St. Joseph. After a few changes to the formula, mainly adding powdered milk to it, so now all anybody needed to do was add water, the company did very well for several years, selling the new ready-mix pancake mix until R.T. Davis died in 1900. The company declared bankruptcy and went through a reorganization. In 1914, the company was renamed the Aunt Jemima Mills Company. In 1926, that company was sold to Quaker Oats, who still owns the brand today, although it is no longer manufactured in St. Joseph. In June 2021, the name was changed back to Pearl Milling Company Pancake and Waffle Mix. Also, Hilliard Products, founded in 1907 by Newton S. Hilliard. Hilliard is a leading manufacturer and distributor of cleaning and hygiene solutions. However, did you know that pretty much every time you watch a basketball game on TV, you are seeing a Hilliard product? From the NCAA to the NBA, Hilliard product is used on their floors. It is the Hilliard Gym Finish. In the 1910s, thanks to the interests of his family, because they were interested in the new game of basketball, they found that the floors were often slick, causing players to be injured. So Ennis, or Newton Hilliard, developed the Gym Finish and a coating that gave the wood floors their shine, but also provided traction for the players, as well as protecting the wood floors they played on. All of you got one of these, right? Cherry Mash was developed in 1918 by the Chase Candy Company, and according to the current company CEO, Barry Yantis, the Cherry Mash is the third oldest candy bar to be continuously made in the country, and was the first candy bar to be manufactured west of the Mississippi River. It is a cherry-flavored center made by mashing maraschino cherries and covered with chocolate and peanuts. The Chase Candy Company actually opened in 1876 by George Washington Chase. And STP, also invented in St. Joseph. In October 1954, three businessmen, Dwight Doc Liggett, Robert DeHart, and James Hill, introduced scientifically treated petroleum, or STP, with one product, the STP oil treatment, and they made it in their garages. They eventually formed a company in 1957. Actually, until 1957, the three of them held their day jobs but went around to races and sold their product out of their trunks. In 1957, they formed the company Chemical Compounds, and the address for the company was listed at the rear of 601 South 9th, the home of Doc Liggett. As the company grew in popularity thanks to word of mouth, Chemical Compounds was able to introduce the STP gas treatment in 1960. And in 1961, STP was bought by Studebaker Packard Corporation, and Chemical Compounds became known as Chemical Compounds, a division of Studebaker Packard, and the company moved from the garage to a building on South 6th Street. An aerial view of St. Joseph from essentially the Kansas side of the river. In St. Joseph today, there are 13 museums and other historic sites and historic neighborhoods to be seen, hopefully, while you're here in St. Joseph. Some of these include the Glore Psychiatric Museum, the Patey House Museum, Mount Morris Cemetery, the Missouri Theater, Museum Hill Historic District, and Harris Kemper Historic District, and so many more. There's even a room of old caskets and the basket that carried the body of Jesse James to the undertaker inside the Heaton Bowman Smith and Sidon Fadden Chapel Funeral Home, if you'd like to go take a look. St. Joseph is also the home of the Kansas City Chiefs training camp. I heard no booze, okay, that's fine. Located at Missouri Western State University. Chiefs. Sorry, that's a whole other topic. St. Joseph is the largest city in Northwest Missouri and continues to grow, embracing its rich past, but also looking towards a bright future. I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat brief history of St. Joseph and that you enjoy your time while you're here, and hopefully you'll come back and see us because, as James Tate said in April 1849, quote, St. Joseph is a very flourishing place, end quote, because we are made with uncommon character. Thank you.